article about the Colorado towns who are loving the tax dollars but not liking some of the other problems that pot brings.
I didn't read that. Let me take a look. What are some of the big problems that they're talking about?
Let's see. I'm trying to scan it and get some cool stuff. So the sales tax from pot is helping us stay afloat. But the town people don't really like the marijuana. Colorado isn't alone, et cetera, et cetera.
Do the town people not like it, or is it like a small contingency of easily annoyed assholes? Because sometimes that's all it takes to get articles like this written.
Colorado pot stores collected $29 million in marijuana taxes, with $11 million budgeted to pay for regulation, enforcement, and drug prevention. The rest went into the city's general fund. A driver who told police he was under the influence of cannabis and alcohol caused a fiery 6-car accident in Denver. I think he's under alcohol too. Yeah, right? I feel the same way.
Yeah, that's...
He was also wearing shoes.
It's been difficult but not impossible to get our arms around what the impact is in Colorado. I don't know if the revenue gained will outweigh what the social costs are. I'm trying to find it right. School counselors told researchers who compiled law enforcement report that so many kids are high, it's impossible to apprehend all but the most impaired. In one instance, a counselor reported that a father allowed 2 brothers to smoke a bowl before school. Others noticed an increase in the number of parents showing up to school stoned. At Montfort Elementary School, 4 10-year-olds were caught buying and selling edible candy bars they stole from their grandparents. I've seen it. I've often said I've seen it all, and clearly I haven't, says Gates, a former police officer. So as everybody sort of points out and loves to mention, the cannabis tax is a windfall, and it's great. But in here it mentions a bunch of emergency room visits for people who are too high.
That's just people panicking. Like nothing bad is going to happen.
That's actually been down, by the way, since they added their 10 milligram rule
for edibles.
Thing. They've had less people visiting than initially when they just said, go do whatever you want with edibles.
And I read someone's account that there was somewhere where you could get these 1,000 milligram bars and stuff. And maybe that's true, but I drove all the way across the state.
Medicinally, you can.
Okay, medicinally you can, but recreationally is what we're talking about anyway. So it's completely immaterial what's on the medicinal side. I mean, it has nothing to do with...
I never pretend
this article is they have this thing that says, so a driver who told police he was under the influence of cannabis and alcohol, that same one. In Colorado, about 20% of 2014 traffic fatalities involved drivers who tested positive for cannabis. Cannabis stays in your system for like a month plus. That's like if you got pulled over for rear-ending someone and they tested you and they could tell that you drank like a 6-pack 3 weeks ago, they'd be like, oh, DUI.
That's not exactly true.
Sorry.
I just the only reason
that is how
I have a little bit of expertise in this because I follow the UFC so tight, and there are some fighters who are just known to be on cannabis all the time, but because their body fat's low and they're so active, it gets out of their system in 2 to 3 days.
Yeah, it's stored in lipids,
right?
So the heavier you are, the more.
Yeah, pro athlete.
Pro athlete.
Thousands of calories a day.
I admit that these guys are in the extreme end of the scale, right? They've got so little body fat and they work so hard. Just 1 second. But also, not everybody is on the other end of the month-and-a-half scale, right? Like, there might be a lot of active people. Oh, 3 weeks.
It's so that's even bigger than Taylor that.
Said.
Because like you're not just taking you're taking a subsection of the population, not the whole population. We're talking about pot smokers' fat lipid levels. like they're all, like this is the guy who's cramming a bag of Doritos every night.
Thinner.
He's not going to burn it.
No, I pointed this out to Woody the other day. Yeah. And actually, studies show that you're less likely to gain weight if you're a constant user. And I said, with that, look at anecdotal evidence. Do you see many super obese pot smokers that do it on the daily?
When I picture a pot smoker in my head, like remember the guy who, what was his name? Strain Central,
Josh.
Right? Yeah. So Josh from Strain Central, he was on the show. He is in my head what I think of as a pot smoker. Or for those of us that were there, Kyle, remember the guy when you were like, you look like you know where to score weed at paintball? That guy wasn't fat. Like when I think of a pot smoker, I think of a guy who for some reason is a little taller than average and thin and
maybe into extreme sports.
Could be, you know,
you might,
and not necessarily.
Things are rad.
I don't actually, and I'm not going there, but you know, like, I don't think of them all as extreme athletes. But yeah, I do think of them as kind of thin and looking good with clothes on. Like that to me is, if their hygiene was better, that's a stereotypical pothead in my head.
I only think of I know that kind of pothead. I have friends who have been that kind of pothead where they honestly would skip meals sometimes, where we'd like go to Qdoba after class in college or something and be like, "You're not getting a burrito, man?" He's like, "No, dude, I'm gonna pick up some, pick up an 8 in a little bit." It's like, all right, well, that's fucking weird. Like, you're gonna go spend more money on pot that you're already high instead of just getting a burrito and eating like a human being.
Yeah,
and then there's
he wants
a
to
different
get
level of pothead that I also knew where they're not smoking all day every day, but they smoke pretty much every day at least once, and they would be heavy, no problem, because they just have their one daily smoke. They're not blowing all their money on pot, and then they just feast on pizza or wings or something that's not that great for you, as opposed to the really skinny ones who are just blowing all of their money on pot, and that's like their modus operandi. Like, everything is to get high. And it's like it's a weird track to watch someone rationalize their way down that rabbit hole, because counterculture has gone so far in favor of weed that now tons of people can't see there are any problems with it ever, and so they just take every opportunity to get as high as possible all the time.
That's always been... There's two things I want to point out. One, I'm for recreational marijuana being legalized, right? Like, sometimes people get the wrong idea because I'm not like 100% on board with everybody 24 blazing it, but in terms of whether it's the right call in terms of prohibition or not, why are you laughing at me?
Because I was laughing at 24 Blaze It.
They made such a big deal on the subreddit that I can't stop it now. But like, I'm not for
7 Blaze It.
Is that
24/7 Blaze It?
Thank you.
Am I saying it wrong? Is that what's so funny?
It's 24/7, and apparently you said 24/7 420 Blaze It, which is like the most. Somebody commented in the subreddit, that thing that Steve Buscemi, where he's like, "Hello, fellow kids." Like, that's kind of what you were like, where you're like, 24/7, smoking all the pots, blazing all the reefers, smoking that devil's lettuce.
I've been pretty consistent on this. Like, I'm for it, but I'm definitely on the outside of this. I'm not pretending to be an actual pothead, but so I'm for it in terms of like, should we have a modern day prohibition and stuff? No, I think that there's more bad that happens from enforcing these laws than good that happens from cutting back on pot use. But one, I get a little irritated at the people who act like pot is like a health drug. Like, oh yeah, it's kind of like celery, it's a negative calories. Yeah. It makes you better. No calories. Yeah, no. Chill, bro. It's not actually great for you. Oh, cheers and your benefits. And then I was going to say something else. I've noticed a trend, and I don't know if it's an actual trend or it's just my awareness of something that hasn't changed at all, but it seems like people are going towards higher concentrates. Like, I see things online where they're like, I figured out how to make a dab, or I figured out a wax thing, or we've made. I talked to a person who said that the butter they made. I guess that's how you make like edibles. Like, you first you get it in the butter and then you use the butter to cook. I'm not even sure, but the butter they made was so concentrated and so effective that it was a point of pride for him or her. And I've just noticed like an intensification of how some people are smoking. It's not exactly like it was before, where like a joint or a bowl was the only way people really did it. And I don't know if that's bad.
I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all. Drink all the alcohol you want, all the marijuana you want. Nothing wrong with that. Speaking of,
I think Kyle was somewhat goofing when he was like, drink all the alcohol, smoke all the pot, until they run out of fish or whatever. But where do you stand on this? Do you think it's a dangerous trend that like wax and edibles and what is a dab is becoming like a more popular thing?
In what way?
It's kind of like how you can drink beer or you could drink whiskey. It's the same thing in there. There's booze in there, ethanol, alcohol, but the effects of it are going to be drastically different just because one is so much more concentrated. Like, it's a different world, because if you drink a fuck ton of rum that's 90 proof or something, you could get alcohol poisoning and die if you drank too much. If you smoke way too much pot in the form of wax or dabs or whatever the correct nomenclature is, you're not going to die, but you will have like a full-on panic attack.
I could argue it's safer, if anything. If you're smoking higher concentrated weed dab is a vapor. It's not even smoke you're burning. But if you're smoking higher concentrated, bud, for example, then you have to smoke less. So you're smoking less of the carcinogenic properties of burning those leaves and stuff like that. Whereas before, at 4%, you have to go through like several ounces of weed to get where you'd want to. So you're burning less carcinogenic properties, which are the bad parts of burning marijuana.
That's also possible.
I'm not an expert.
My thought process. Go ahead.
Okay, and Chiz makes a good point. But in terms of the THC consumption, right? Like if you had a population that tended to drink beer, and then you had another population that tended to drink vodka, I bet the vodka population would have more alcohol-related problems.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, but can you give me several examples of the marijuana-related problems?
No.
Because one is just getting to the end goal quicker. If the equivalency, let's just use basic terms, I have to smoke 1 joint of the good stuff and 5 joints of the bad stuff. My end goal is to get to a certain level of highness.
I just feel like
do that, I think that's fine. But it's also like, see, this was my rationale for it, is that if someone starts drinking and it's their first time drinking, do you hand them 2 fingers of Macallan 18 Scotch whiskey, or do you give them a Bud Light? You give them a Bud Light because you need them to be able to feel that feeling as it's going on and being like, okay, I will have another can of this, drink it, getting drunk a little slowly. Way better that than, oh, I drank way too much of this whiskey. Oh, now I'm fucked.
Sure, if the argument is getting someone into it, yeah, you shouldn't hit it out. You shouldn't get into a Formula One race car if that's what you're going to learn to drive on. I agree with that. But as far as a daily user, there's really no difference as far as what's bad for you as opposed to something like alcohol, where you do get a physical dependency on it and you can actually overdose and damage your liver severely.
The thing is, Chiz, I feel like I don't know how to measure how high you are, but let's pretend there was a blood alcohol content equivalent. You're much more likely to overshoot what you would have otherwise hit with less potent stuff.
But when you hit, but the worst case scenario is, all right, I'm having a bad time right now. It's not like alcohol where
that's the worst case scenario that night. And I agree with you. It's not the worst thing, right? Maybe you get too much anxiety, you feel paranoid, you call the police on yourself or something,
people will have a full-on panic attack sometimes if they're not used to it. Like, it's not just a joke thing. Like, if you see someone who's not used to pot and they smoke way too much wax or some of that crazy intense shit, it's not just like, oh, guys, I'm a little too high right now. Maybe I can't come out to the bars with you. It's like some of those people like go ghost white and are non-functional for hours.
But what I was trying to say is, so for that night, they might have a horrible experience. But if it's really easy to get to that level consistently, then, I just don't know what the long-term effects are of using more THC on a regular basis. Are they going to have that like little memory loss thing that sometimes people get? Are they going to... I don't know. It just, like I said, it's like using vodka. You're much more, you can so easily hit the far side of your goal that perhaps it's a negative thing.
And the tolerance, to kind of piggyback on the point that Woody is making on tolerance, just like alcohol, like if you get into drinking a ton of beer all the time and getting drunk on that all the time, it's going to take you way longer to build up your tolerance on that than it is if you're just crushing vodka every day, and eventually your body's just like, oh well,
but that's assuming you're having the same quantities of these things. With marijuana, you're going to smoke a little because you have such high. What you're smoking is so high.
That's not necessarily true. I know enough people that moved over to wax and those kinds of pot products because they're like, oh, we're going to save money. Like, it's way more expensive, but we'll smoke like one hit instead of a whole blunt. And what inevitably happens is they take one hit of that thing. They're just as high as they were. They're at their peak. And then they're like, let's take another one. Let's push the limit. And eventually their tolerance is so out of whack that they need those intense kinds of pot to actually get high. Like smoking just like a doobie like you see in a movie from the 70s. They just laugh at that and be like, yeah, I want to get high. That wouldn't even...
Sure, that's just tolerance. But that's just tolerance. But the argument, initially, what Kyle said too, it's not that hard to reset that. But the argument was the adverse effects of starting out so high with, or just consuming the super high potency stuff. The negative effect I keep coming back to is, what is that negative effect? Oh, their tolerance is high. Big deal. Take a break. Come back to it. You're not going to kill yourself. Like I said, you're smoking less carcinogenic properties because you're starting out the gate smoking more higher quality stuff.
Yeah, the carcinogenic stuff is a good point because you're dodging some of that.
And
but I also think that Taylor and I are right on this notion that you're gonna build up your tolerance. If it's so easy to consume a large amount, then you're more likely to consume more than if it was hard or slow.
Well,
too
that
much
comes
of
down to
anything.
an opinion.
It comes down. What it comes down to is too much of anything is a bad thing, whether it's ice cream, alcohol, or marijuana. If you're a fool, you're going to end up in a bad state, no matter what your drug of choice is, whether it's hot wings or heroin. It's all about responsible use, and literally with anything and everything. You could responsibly use heroin. I'm sure it could be done, right? But nobody's really able to, and to a lesser extent, not. There aren't nearly as many people who aren't able to use marijuana responsibly or semi-responsibly. You know what I mean? That it's a small percentage of, I think, the marijuana users who get into that inevitable like wormhole or whatever of just higher and higher tolerance, more high, bigger high, and double it, triple it, quadruple it until their tolerance is outrageous and they're literally smoking all day, every day just to feel normal.
I think for the most part, you're right with that. Yeah, most people aren't going to fall into that.
Yeah,
but some do. Overall, yeah, I agree with you, Chiz.
The people that smoke daily do take tolerance breaks to reset.
The positives far and wide outweigh the negatives, I think, of marijuana legalization. Those cartels down there, anything that hurts them seems like a good thing. If there's a modern day, group of people that we can all agree are awful, it's those Mexican drug cartels.